everyone and welcome back to my channel Beth Chats Books. Now today is going to be a wrap up of the Octafinals Booktube Fiction Group D Round 1. So the Booktube prize is now into the round 2, which is the quarterfinals, and people have been assigned the next groupings for the fiction round. But I was lucky enough to judge the Octafinals round for fiction with the Group D's category, and until April I wasn't allowed to speak about them because we had to submit our ballads, our judgings of the 6 books that we read, but I've already done that. So some of these books have progressed on, because the way that the prize works is that there's 6 in each category and the top 3 I think go forward to the next round based on what the individual judges ranked. So obviously I don't know what the other judges in my round ranked these books, but I can tell you, and I know a lot of people are uploading at the moment, their ranking, their opinions of the rounds that they've judged. I've seen that Brodesser-Akner himself has done his Group A round because he became a last minute judge for Group A in the fiction Octafinals round, and so I thought I would contribute, and I'll also link his channel down below, and I will link down below the Booktube prize channel that Brodesser-Akner created specifically for the prize if you want to go and see and have a nosy who judged what, now that their videos are all up. So let's see how I got on with my round. So the first book that I read was An Orchestra of Minorities by Chigozie, Obioma, and I read it quite a while ago now and I took it out of the library, so I have returned it, so I'll just insert a picture here. So this is set in Nigeria and it follows the main character Nonso, and he is a chicken farmer in Nigeria, and the novel starts with him driving past a bridge in Nigeria and he sees a lady who we later identify as Ta-Nehisi, who is about to commit suicide on the bridge. So he talks her off the ledge as such, and from there we take the story. Now this story is almost a romance but not quite. So it's a look at what you would do for love and how drastically you would change yourself, and ultimately how the moral of the story is really maybe you shouldn't do that because it doesn't exactly work out for our poor protagonist. I connected quite deeply with this book because I was kind of reading it at the peak of a breakup of my own, so the heartbreak and the way he describes his love interest and the way he's besotted by her and obsessed with her and heartbroken at the way the relationship disintegrates was kind of very powerful for me at the time, because I was kind of feeling similar feelings of heartache. So I actually really enjoyed this one. It surprised me because it was not what I expected the book to be about at all. Contextually at the moment, a lot of books with that kind of title have led me to think that they were going to be similar to the Underground Railroad or to other novels like Girl, Woman, Other that kind of take on topics of race, and it wasn't really about race or identity or the struggle for identity, which is what I actually expected the book to be about. So I think I ended up giving it 4 stars. Upon reflection, at the time I enjoyed it a lot more than I think I do now, because I can't really remember that much about the novel, apart from that it was an epic romance and the disintegration of one. And obviously it follows Nigerian culture and identity and class as well, really, because Nonso is trying to compete and prove himself in the world where there's many different suitors who are also have better prospects, that would be a better match for Ta-Nehisi, who is from a wealthier family than Nonso. So he is struggling to create status for himself to be a suitable match. So yeah, I enjoyed it, but there isn't that much more to say about it. I think it will be a book that people will either really enjoy or not. It's not got the wow factor and the oomph of some of the other books in this round. But I remember reading it and really enjoying it and thinking I got off to a good start. But I have a feeling that a lot of other people probably in this category that were judging maybe didn't enjoy it as much. I haven't heard a lot about this book in the wider sphere of Booktube, so maybe it's not had quite the reception. Anyway, the next book I read was Lanny by Max Porter. Now this ended up becoming one of my favourites out of the 6 books. So when I first finished An Orchestra of Minorities, I thought it has a good chance of being in my top 3. Then I read Lanny and there was no disputing it would be in my top 3. So this follows little Lanny, who lives in a remote village in the UK. And there's a bit of a legend of a character called Old Papa Toothwort, who is meant to belong to this village, and he's almost a fable and a tale. And we kind of learn that Lanny has a relationship with this character. And Lanny's different than all the other boys at school. He's very eccentric, he loves nature, and he doesn't conform with what you would expect a boy of his age to. He's not interested in football. His parents find him bemusing and eccentric, and he's just different. And it's such a refreshing little book. And then towards the middle of the novel, we lose Lanny. He goes missing and we find out what happened. The ending was a surprise. I don't want to ruin it because I think a lot of people will want to read this book. I had a slight little niggle with the ending, but overall it was such a pleasurable book. It's so unique, it's just so different what it's attempting to do, and it presents a really interesting look at a refreshingly different child and his love of nature and his love of people and connection, and the magical elements with Old Papa Toothwort and this playing with magical elements almost was really fun and enjoyable. So I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I think I just missed giving it a full 5 stars because the ending slightly niggled me a little bit. I realised throughout the rest of this video that if I really enjoy the book, I tend to not have too much to say about it. And also these books were such a long time ago reading them as well. But usually I have a lot more to say when I have struggled with a book. Lanny was not that particular book, so I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to ruin it, but very much enjoyed it. So at the end of finishing Lanny, I had Lanny at the top and An Orchestra of Minorities at 2nd place. And then I went on to read Jacqueline Woodson's Red at the Bone. Now, this will appeal to so many people. I've noticed since I finished reading this that a lot of people have read this book or have started to read this book. Now, if you like things like Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, or you are into Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, then I think you will really enjoy this book because it's similar thematically. It's about race and identity and culture and coming of age and figuring out who you are. So this is set in Brooklyn in 2001, and this follows Melody, who is having a coming of age party, and her grandparents are quite wealthy. That we know from the beginning because they're having this very ostentatious celebration. But we realise that they're making so much effort for Melody's coming of age ceremony because her mother, Iris, never managed to have her coming of age party because she was pregnant at the age of 16 with Melody at the time, so she didn't get to celebrate. So we go through the lives of Melody, Iris and Aubrey. And Aubrey is Melody's father, and we learn about all the different identities. So Iris really struggles with living and raising Melody. She wants more for her life and she wants to get an education, and towards the end of the novel she goes to university, and then she kind of has a bit of a sexual awakening and realises that maybe she isn't a straight woman, maybe she has some queer identity, she kind of experiments with women, and she starts a love affair with a woman that goes terribly. And then we learn about Melody and Aubrey's love for Melody and his unrequited love for Iris. It's always not seemed to work out very well. So this is an epic in miniature. I think somewhere on the back of this book someone has described it as that. I swear I've heard a quote somewhere about it, and I can't see it off the top of my head, but it really is. It is about these characters, but in such an intimate, zoomed in way that I've been surprised in hindsight with how much this has impacted. It's great for people who don't want to read a really long novel, because you really feel like, even though it's quite short, you spend a lot of time with the characters. And I was watching a podcast / book club video of Roxane Gay's book club, and they discussed this particular book, and they were saying how she is so disciplined with words, Jacqueline Woodson, how she could say so much and she doesn't over describe stuff, but the imagery is so vivid in here. It's very almost filmic and cinematic that you can really feel in the moment and feel how all the characters are feeling, but in such a short amount of time and a short amount of pages. So this really blew me away, and it did affect the scoreboard. So this one I think was one of my favourite reads, this and Lanny. So it was always going to be a bit of a struggle, I think, where they were going to fit. Now, off the top of my head, I can't actually remember whether Lanny or Red at the Bone came first. I believe in the end I put Lanny, Red at the Bone, and then an Orchestra of Minorities. But it's such a long time ago that I submitted that ballad that I might have put this one above Lanny, but I think I put Lanny first and then this one. But I really, really enjoyed this book, and upon reflection, I've enjoyed it more as time's gone on, and I'm really glad that I actually bought the book so that I can reread at a later date. So those were the fun ones, and I got off to a great start. But then I read The Innocents by Michael Crummy. Now, I've heard so many people have actually really enjoyed this book, and I really wanted to enjoy this book. So it's set in 18th century Newfoundland and follows two siblings. Everett, who's around 12 at the beginning of the novel, who's the brother, and Ava, who's 10, who's the sister. So at the beginning of the novel, they lose their parents and a very young newborn sister to a mysterious illness, and they dispose of the bodies, and they're left in this deserted island in Newfoundland all on their own. So throughout the novel, we get a few characters who join them sporadically. For example, their father had a business deal almost with a ship that would come twice a year to the island, and they would negotiate. They would grow things on the island, and in exchange they would get commodities that would help them survive the winter. Now, I don't particularly like novels that are on remote islands, really isolated environments, because it doesn't lead to great character development, because it's more about the harshness of the landscape and survival. Now, I particularly don't like those styles of novels anyway. I don't get the core of drama and passion that I really enjoy in a novel. So that already didn't go in its favour. But one thing that really deterred me from this novel, and a lot of people probably have just read through it, but I really struggled, is that Everett and Ava, at certain points in the novel, as they grow, it becomes Buildings Roman. They learn about sexuality and puberty and all these different feelings, and confusion start happening. But it leads to both characters exploring their sexuality through each other. So it becomes quite graphically incestual in a few parts of the novel, which I found very difficult to read about and to stomach. It adds a different layer of discomfort as well, because nobody's been able to sit down with these characters and explain how puberty works and how they're going to feel. And so they almost seem very innocent and naive, and also know it's wrong but don't really understand why either. They've not been educated or socialised with anybody else. So you read it and you feel uncomfortable and they're confused, and it really put me off the novel. I know for a lot of people they can just put that aside, and I'm not a particularly squeamish reader either, but with it not going anywhere and then huge chunks of just description of them having a sexual relationship with one another was just a bit too much for me. So I kind of got to the point where I didn't really get it. It didn't connect with me anymore, and so it ended up being the worst novel of the 6 that I read, and I did rank it for certain at the bottom because it just wasn't my kind of novel. And I think that's the great thing about this prize. Some of them are going to be great hits with you and some of them are going to be misses, but the whole point is for you to select which ones have connected with you. So that just wasn't for me. And then the next one I read was Fleischman is in Trouble by Taffy, Brodesser-Akner. This was an interesting book to me because for a long time in the book I was enjoying it. Then it started to get to the point where I questioned where I'm going with this. Then it dragged a little bit further, and by the end I just wanted to finish the book. So this is, I think, around 370 pages. But it was sold as one thing and really was another. So when I read the premise of this, it's about Toby Fleischman and his wife Rachel, and they're starting to look at getting a divorce. So their relationship is disintegrated, they have 2 children together, and Toby's at that point where he thinks she's a bitch and he doesn't care, he wants to get rid of this relationship, and then he wants to use dating apps to build his ego back up. So that starts to get a little bit tedious. I know a lot of people have DNF'd this book purely because the misogynistic male perspective of instantaneous sex through apps and the gratification of that, to a lot of people, is a bit of a turn off. I know Mercy over at Mercy's Bookish Musings DNF'd this pretty quickly because she said, I don't understand why a woman's written about a man's perspective and all about these sexual apps and the exploitation of women's bodies, and I get that, and I was willing to look past that to see where this was going to go, because it was propositioned by the blurb that he's trying to distract himself with all these things and then Rachel goes missing, and I thought it was almost going to have that thriller-esque vibe of what on earth happened to Rachel. But then, before even halfway through the novel, we know that Rachel hasn't really gone missing. There's no plausible threat that she has gone missing or something has happened to her. It's almost that she's checked out of her life with her children and she's had an affair and she just can't be bothered. So that was really deflating to read about because I just didn't then understand what the point of this novel was. Then what's really interesting and I found particularly irritating is there's a female character in Toby's life. So he's a doctor, but he has 2 friends from university years and when he went travelling to the Middle East, that she ends up narrating things about Toby's perspective while she's not with him, about how he's feeling about Rachel and the divorce and the relationship, that I didn't really get. I didn't understand how she had a perspective on how Toby felt from just a friend angle. And then at some points when I was reading the book, it was almost like this female friend had feelings for Toby because she seemed to be very invested in what he was doing, but then she would say that they were always friends and she was a protective friend. But there was this just grey area with her character and the role of her character and what she really brought to the novel and why we were having everything filtered through her perspective as well. So I had too many question marks with this, and by the end it actually became a bit boring. There's a moment where Rachel finally is found, and she's found by Toby's strange female friend, and that also didn't make sense, and there was just a lot of disconnect. So it was written well, and I enjoyed it marginally better than The Innocents by Michael Crummy, and that's why I ended up putting this at second to last in the 6 books. But I just started getting bored and I didn't really get it. So if anybody else had a much more enthusiastic experience with this, I'd love to know, because I've seen a few booktubers put on Instagram that this was one of their favourite books of this year, which, fair enough, if you enjoyed it. I just didn't. So I'd like to know if anybody else actually finished this and didn't like it, whether they had a similar point of view to me as well, or if you think that my point of view is crackers, then, you know, comment down below and we can have a discussion. But there's that one. And also the same about The Innocents, really, because I saw that Varta Hordes in particular enjoyed that book, but I guess it's almost a case of individual choice and preference. And then the last book that I read was Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Water Dancer. So I submitted my ballot just before I finished this, but I think I was around halfway. And the final scores on the doors were, from my memory, was Lanny, Red at the Bone, An Orchestra of Minorities, The Water Dancer, Fleischman is in Trouble, and then The Innocents. So I ended up putting this in the middle-ish. So I did enjoy this book overall. This follows Hiram, who is a slave in the south of America. And then he kind of gets upgraded to the house because his father is the slave owner. He had an affair / a sexual relationship exploitation with one of the slaves, which resulted in Hiram. Hiram's mother gets sold off to another plantation, but he gets upgraded to the house, where he ends up looking after his brother, who is the legitimate child of the slave owner, who is white. Obviously Hiram is mixed race and the illegitimate child. And then through that he ends up escaping the plantation and getting himself embroiled in the Underground Railroad. So obviously this reminded me a lot of the Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, and it also reminded me of other narratives around this topic, so films like 12 Years a Slave. I can't think of any other novels, but there's quite a few that I've read in the past few years that deal with being on the plantation as well, and slave identity and things like that. So it didn't particularly do anything new in terms of enhancing this well-known narrative of being a slave in the south of America. However, it did have some magical realism elements where Hiram channels through water powers that allow him to almost move across space. I don't know what the official term is that, because I was going to say levitating, but it's not levitating. He can kind of travel, but not through time, just through space, which I kind of went with. I didn't love. I thought it was a bit jarring, especially when there's a lot of description of violence and abuse in this novel, which obviously the themes would raise that kind of depiction. It was much more readable than Fleischman or The Innocents, but it didn't have the wow factor. I don't know how to explain it. I just didn't love it, I guess, is the most concise way that I can describe that. I loved the descriptions of water and his complicated relationship to the slave trade, how he had this really confusing relationship with his father because his father was a slave owner and treated him as lesser than his brother, but almost had some resounding guilt about that as he aged. Then there is a lady, Thema, or Thena, I can't remember off the top of my head, who is another of the slaves, who she kind of becomes his adopted mother when his mother gets sold, because she had her own children get sold away from her and sent away. And that is an interesting relationship, and he's trying to find his identity. It's a little slapdash of romance, but not really. It's about his relationship as well to the Underground Railroad and what's right and what's wrong, and it develops from there. It was pleasant and I enjoyed it while I read it, and considering it's quite a chunky book actually, I did read it quite quickly, but it did not knock my socks off. So I just gave it middle of the road reading experience, and that's why it placed 4th out of 6. So I'm really sorry if this was waffly. I didn't really plan so much. I just felt like maybe this was a good opportunity to film this and upload this and join the hype while I can discuss these books. So they are my thoughts. Obviously I am now going to be judging the quarterfinals, non-fiction round Group C, and I have mentioned in my previous video those books that I will be reading. So once they are balloted and ranked by the end of May, then I can discuss them. But obviously I will be bringing you more content about books that I'm reading in between that time. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with a brand new video. Bye now.